Welcome to our second special meeting of the Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where we will be looking at the budget. I'd like to inform those present that this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. There are some members in attendance as substitutes today. Councillor Earthy?
Yes. Councillor Earthy for Councillor Fishley.
Thank you. And Councillor Sheard?
Hi, Councillor Sheard in for Councillor Fowler.
Thank you very much. Do any members wish to declare any interest in relation to any matters included on the agenda? Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm on the board of the Brighton Hove Food Partnership, which we may be discussing today.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, nothing else. So we have no part 2 items today, so there's no reason to exclude the press and public. So we are holding our second special Place Overview and Scrutiny meeting to look at the budget. The minutes of this meeting and any specific comments or recommendations made by committee members will be shared with Cabinet. At the last special meeting, we looked at the draft plans. Today we'll be looking at the final budget plans being proposed to full council on the 26th of February, in a week's time, for approval. We have already scrutinised much of the budget, so today we'll be focusing on the changes made since our last meeting. This includes the housing revenue account, which had not been part of the papers last time. We're joined by Councillor Jacob Taylor, Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Finance and City Regeneration, and John Hooton, Interim Director of Property and Finance, who is only able to join us online today. They will be talking to us about the budget and then taking questions from members. We are also joined by Cabinet members and officers who are on hand to help with any questions, and I'd like to welcome them all to the meeting. We will start with Councillor Taylor, who will give us a brief overview of the changes made to the budget since our last meeting. Following that, I'd like to open up for questions on the HRA first, as our colleagues from Housing need to leave early. Then I will open up to questions on everything else on the budget. Although we have only this one item on the agenda, this is an important subject for scrutiny, so I imagine there'll be a lot of questions to get through. Therefore, can I please request that both those asking and answering questions are as brief and to the point as possible. So, there are no public questions and no member questions, and so I'll welcome Councillor Taylor to the meeting to give an overview of the changes since our last meeting. Councillor Taylor, please start when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. And there was a PowerPoint. I don't know whether that can be shared. If not, it doesn't really matter. It's all the information that's already been shared with Council. It's just in a slightly summarised form, but I can just talk to that anyway. I'll start. And as before, I'll try and be as brief as possible, because clearly most time should be for members to ask questions. So just to recap where we are. Back in December, we reported a budget gap of 25 million and a set of proposals at that time for just over £12 million of savings, and we obviously noted that we would then need to come back with a final budget once we received our local government settlement from government and understood our true financing picture. Noted there were a number of changes under government funding, under the Fair Funding Review, which overall didn't hugely benefit us. We had some things that were up and then some things were down. Mainly that review was around deprivation, so we didn't get a huge amount from that, although subsequently our settlement is slightly higher than what had been understood in the original statement. And so what we've now obviously published is a set of further proposals, and that's what we're looking at today. And then obviously that will go to Budget Council next week on Thursday. It's worth noting that we have applied for extra government support. It's a programme called Exceptional Financial Support, and we've put in for 15 million of funding for that, specifically to look at the issue of temporary accommodation and emergency accommodation. As I've said to committee before, that issue has really manifested in recent years much more sharply, particularly in financial terms. So to give the context, in the budget we're currently operating within, we had a net general fund budget of about £8 million for emergency and temporary accommodation. The pressures that we're seeing there, because there have been some more families and there's also been an increase in cost in some areas, come into that service. That 8 million was forecast to go to 20 million next year, which is just, a huge increase. If you think about most businesses or charities facing a more than doubling of that level of cost for a particular service, I mean, that is exceptional. It doesn't really get more exceptional than that, something more than doubling in terms of its cost. And so therefore we're sort of faced with a choice. And we were minded to agree with one of the suggestions that Councillor Sykes made at the last Scrutiny meeting, which is, have you thought about EFS or extra government health? And I said, yes, I think that is a good idea, and that is exactly what we've applied for. Of course, the alternative, if that wasn't applied for, would be to make a larger set of savings to revenue budgets, and no one would want to do that. So it's a targeted request for support for us to be able to fix the underlying issue. And I think it's really important we hold in mind, and what I've said at Cabinet, is that we've got to try and fix the underlying issue. The underlying issue is a huge problem for the city for a number of reasons, not least the families that are impacted by it. We shouldn't have any homeless households in the city or the country. We're a rich, advanced economy. We shouldn't have people living in temporary accommodation. They should be in settled accommodation, either in private rented or if they can afford to own their own home, or better, more public and council housing so people can have affordable settled accommodation. So what we need to do is actually fix the underlying issue. What we can't keep doing is just chucking the revenue budget at the issue, because that £20 million that I'm talking about as a pressure is not funding for families. It is every single penny of it. Every single penny is going to private landlords, because that's how temporary accommodation is provided for when we don't have enough in-house. So our overall approach is to try and fix the issue. We announced last year a plan to rapidly buy as many properties as possible to bring it back in-house, because when the properties are in-house, it doesn't cost us on the revenue budget. And so that 15 million that we're seeking from government, and we hope to get confirmed soon, is to help facilitate that and support that and bridge that gap, and fix the underlying issue, which is what we've got to do as a city and a society. In terms of just quickly the in-year position, which I know is separate but is highly related, TBM 9 reports a forecast 4.8 million overspend. That's down quite significantly from month 8, which was over £9 million. There's been a few one-off actions there to bring that down. Obviously, that's come significantly in the right direction. There are a set of actions that officers and teams are working on to make sure we try and get that into balance at year end so that we don't have an overspend. And then just to quickly talk about the medium-term picture, where it ends up in the budget is the gaps that we're looking at is, 25 million for the forthcoming year, which is what the budget seeks to address, and then similar gaps in future years. And I think it's just important to say that we have already published as part of the budget papers a plan. It's not a complete plan yet, but a plan to get into a sustainable position over the medium term. And much of that is about addressing the pressures that we've talked about, but it's also about innovating. It's also about investing in digital to try and make sure the council is more efficient where it can be, and make revenue savings so that taxpayer money can go to providing those essential services. In terms of the proposals themselves, obviously councillors will have seen them all. I don't know whether we want each cabinet member to briefly present the ones that are relevant to place, or do you want to go straight to questions?
I think the idea is that on this meeting that we go straight to questions, and that the relevant cabinet members will answer any questions that you think they should answer, but that it's your budget, essentially. Okay,
I'm happy with that. And with permission, Chair, could we start with HRA? Because I know officers have a government meeting shortly.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So questions on the HRA first, please, if there are any. Councillor Sykes.
Thank you. I don't know if this is particularly about the budget, but I think it's about a point about the HRA, which is in the papers, that it's about the rent collection rate, which obviously affects the overall position. I think 1% in rent collection is worth about £700,000 or £800,000 in the HRA budget. Rent collection is down. It's something we were considering as a possible amendment to sort of put more effort into rent collection to sort of boost that collection rate and boost the HRA, which is in a difficult position at the moment. Is there anything you can say about that rent collection rate which is down, and anything we can do about that?
Thank you. Just before Martin answers the question in a more technical way, I do want to point out that a significant number of our residents are going over to a different universal credit system, and this is causing delays in their payments and delays in their housing benefit, etc. So they may be late in paying rent, but we do not want to penalise those people or put too much pressure on those people because it's not their fault. We do know that rent will come eventually, but we would like it quicker. But rather than, I just feel for those people and they're under so much pressure already, is they just need that bit of compassion and a bit of support and help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. As Jill said, the impact really is about transfer to universal credit and the payment in arrears. The housing income team have got a recovery plan that's set out in the papers, and that's around 4 key areas. Firstly, it's looking at alternative payment arrangements. Clearly, we're not in a position where we want to be taking legal action against tenants. We want to work with tenants to enable them to pay their rent. So we want to safeguard tenancies, secure more direct payment of universal credit. That's really important. The second issue is automation. Where we can introduce automation, it can free up capacity for our tenants to be engaged more directly with officers rather than officers doing tasks that can be automated. We want to enhance early intervention. That's around ensuring where tenants are moving to universal credit, they receive timely guidance and support. And finally, we are strengthening links with our money advice. We fund money advice to ensure tenants get money advice, because obviously sometimes you have a situation where rent is only one of a number of debts and there may be difficult choices to make. So money advice is really critical, and also making sure our staff are skilled and confident about navigating universal credit and financial pressures. But the main thing is recognising there'll be cost of living pressures on our tenants that don't just affect their rent. So it's having that holistic approach to actually engage with them, but also release our staff time to focus on that really important relational work rather than, being too much into tasks that can be, switched over to automation we can do differently. So that's the recovery plan. That's the way we're seeking to address this issue.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you. Sorry, this isn't a question about the HRA. It's a question generally about the budget situation. Have we heard yet whether we've got the extra funding, the ESF? And if we haven't, what's our plan B?
John may come in. I believe there's a date which is fairly close to Budget Council. Will they confirm it for everybody? But John, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Jacob. Exactly that. It has not been confirmed for anyone at the moment. It's confirmed for all councils at the same time. We expect that potentially at the end of next week or the beginning. Sorry, at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. But we haven't received, and no councils have received confirmation yet.
In terms of what would happen if we do, well, I'm fairly confident that we will get it. I saw that in the news yesterday, Warrington had applied for 354 million of exceptional financial support, which perhaps means that we're not trying hard enough. So I think our request will be somewhat lower down the range of concerns from the government. So I would anticipate that it would be. If it were not, we would need to look to amend the budget and make alternative arrangements. But I'm fairly confident that we will receive it.
Thank you. Are there any more questions specifically on the HRA? Okay, well, in which case... Sorry, Councillor Goddard.
On the exceptional funding.
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
It's sort of connected.
I think there's a number of highlights in the budget. This meeting specifically about additional savings, but I welcome, as a member of Scrutiny, the seriousness with which we're looking at the real reasons around homelessness and the increasing use of temporary accommodation. If you ever want proof that local government can be useful, then I think the seriousness with which you're setting out an ambition to deal with this is just that reason. This is why local government exists. This is why people are involved in local politics. So praise for that. Could you give me and us a little bit more insight? You seem confident, Councillor Taylor, about receiving the 15 million, but can you give us a little bit more insight in terms of what you and the department want to do with this? Is this just a mass entry to the housing market? We're just going to buy, or what is the strategy in that?
Thank you, Councillor Goddard. Through you, Chair. Yeah, I'm sort of reasonably confident, and perhaps I'll get egg on my face. I'm reasonably confident because the way that we have applied for it and the way that we're setting out is with a plan. What we're not doing is saying, give us the ability to borrow and we'll try and figure out what we're going to do and we'll just punt the issue down the road. The reason that we're doing it is because we think the issue can be solved. Indeed, we have a moral, political, economic imperative to solve it. We cannot not solve it. We cannot keep spending £20 million a year of taxpayers' money to private landlords for emergency accommodation. It's a ludicrous position for the city and the country to be in. So it has to be solved. Now, to your point about how we solve it, yes, largely speaking, I think one of the ways that we are going to solve it is rapid acquisition of properties. As councillors will be aware, it's a programme that has existed and started under the previous administration. I know there's cross-party support with Tories and the Greens, I think, in the acquisitions were a good idea to start with. We have already accelerated that, and as Jill mentioned previously, we're about to hit, or have just hit, our 500th property acquired back. So in the short term, we're not going to be able to build properties that quick. We all know that from the point of identifying the site and then going through planning, it takes 3-4 years. So we can't build brand new property. So we believe that in the short term, there is a genuine need and opportunity to acquire properties quicker. There's obviously also the potential use of council voids as an interim measure to ease the pressure on the homeless families point and fill those voids with homeless families and then bring down the EATA population. So yes, we are active in the housing market. We're very active in the housing market to try and acquire properties. I think it's also notable that it might be the right time to do it, because we do know, both anecdotally and from some figures, that some landlords are exiting the market at the moment for various reasons. Some of that, and I know Councillor Meadows thinks that might be a bad thing, but maybe it's a good thing, that landlords are exiting the market because of the renters' rights reforms. Maybe that's an opportunity to switch the ownership of housing in this country, which is to say, well, maybe as landlords leave the market, maybe the local authority might want to step in and become the landlord and take those properties, which is exactly what we are already doing and intend to expand rapidly throughout the year. But is there anything that Martin and Jeanette wanted to say?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, and thank you for the question. In terms of the ambition that we have to transform homelessness and address the housing crisis, it can probably be summarised in 3 ways. First of all, we want to do more prevention and early intervention. We do well in terms of prevention, but we know there's more we can do, particularly with digital solutions. So that's the first strand. The second strand is about where we can't avoid someone becoming homeless. Then we're making sure that we place people in cost-effective and good quality TA, and that's why it's so important that we use our own stock, as well as making sure that we have really effective contracting arrangements with contract monitoring arrangements as well. And then thirdly, it's about move on. So the point about the increase in supply, if we can create opportunities for people to have more secure tenancies, then that means we can move people through. And so they're the 3 strands that we're really focused on in terms of building on the good work that the teams have been doing so far, but really being transformative around it.
Thank you. Councillor Sykes.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if this might be an opportunity to put a recommendation about EFS, but I mean, I can talk to it, and then whether it's accepted or not is up to...
Give me 1 minute on that, because I want to ask the housing team whether they, because this is kind of connected, obviously, to your area, but it's not, strictly speaking, questions about the housing revenue account. So I'm just checking whether that you know that you can leave if you want to, kind of thing, because I know you're in a hurry to get away. So, because we can continue to talk about this.
And so, Chair, so through you, so officers have got an important meeting with the regulator, haven't they, at 2:30, so they're going to excuse themselves, and Jill as well, and I'll have a go at answering whatever Councillor Sykes comes up with next.
Yeah, well, and I think that this is a good moment for you to talk about the recommendation you're planning to bring, and I think we'll bring in John Hooton on that subject. So we'll probably take votes on recommendations at the end, but we should discuss them as part of whenever the subject comes up, kind of thing. So
I mean, this does relate to the EATA matter as well. And I was, I mean, just looking through the cabinet papers or Section 8, the use of EFS, I don't quite understand the conversation I've just heard, because what I'm seeing here is that the proposed use of the 15 million is 4.473 to fund exceptional revenue pressures for temporary accommodation, and the rest is to fund the collection fund deficit and then recharging reserves. So other than meeting those pressures, I don't really see where the investment in our temporary and emergency accommodation is. It's just meeting those pressures. So that's my comment. My proposal, given that comment, is that this committee consider what might be seen as a somewhat counterintuitive approach to EFS, which is that we reduce the amount of exceptional financial support from government to only that required to balance the budget in the next financial year. The only thing we are borrowing over 20 years at Public Works Loan Board's rate, which is about 6%, which will add to our debt over the next 20 years, and we are borrowing largely to recharge reserves, which seems to me to indicate a certain lack of faith in this authority in its ability to meet its savings targets in the next financial year. And do we really want to increase our indebtedness for that purpose? Should we rather not ensure that we are disciplined in both setting and implementing our savings targets in the next financial year? I think it's really, it's for the committee to discuss and consider. We're borrowing 15 million at 66% over 20 years to recharge reserves. Do we really want to do that?
So I'll come in first, Chair, and then John may want to come in. I wouldn't say it was a somewhat counterintuitive suggestion. There was a very, very counterintuitive and rather silly suggestion. A few things to unpack. If we don't cover the element of the revenue funding, which I know you're not actually suggesting, you're suggesting don't cover the differential, but the covering of the revenue obviously allows other investment in other parts of the budget, because if you have to cover that revenue gap with other savings, that's taking it away. Now, where's the investment coming? Well, it's coming in the other parts of the papers that are relatively clear, which is the overall HRA investment. The investment in new housing set out in the budget is 112 million, which by my reckoning of checking previous budgets is by some distance higher than previous years' budgets. I checked the last 5 or 6 under Green administration, it was sort of 80 or 90, again 90s with us in recent years. There's quite a big increase in investment in new build housing. The report also sets out the other investments in acquisitions, including for TA, so the investments are there. In terms of the use of it to build up reserves, well, again, a fairly revealing and typical comment. Why do we need reserves? Why are we not confident in our budget? Well, the only party that has recently not kept to their in-year budget and has overspent, and not just overspent, but taken our reserves to a catastrophically low level, a level probably as low as any unitary authority in the country on a like-for-like basis when you compare to authority size, is of course the last Green administration. So it doesn't surprise me that they don't think that we should have a more sustainable level of reserves. This is absolutely the right thing to do, to one, protect services more than they need to be looked at for savings, and it's absolutely right that we build up a level of financial resiliency that allows us to make the investments in the other places. Now, of course, we're setting a budget that we want to be able to stick to in year, but we know that budgets can be difficult in year. We know that you can sometimes set a saving and you might even achieve that saving, but within the exact same department, a set of pressures come in that you weren't expecting. So you might have achieved your homelessness prevention with the number of families you wanted to support, but then if then 100 more families than you were expecting come in, that adds a significant amount of pressure. So I think it's a very, very bad suggestion, and I would posit that if Councillor Sykes was in my position and running the administration, he would not really take that level of risk with council finances, and I'd strongly suggest, but it's totally up to committee, that they don't agree with that. John may want to come in on the CFO point.
Thank you. Just to add, I mean, without wishing to repeat everything. I mean, I think it's worth understanding that reserves are at a critically low level and well below the level that would be recommended for an authority of our size. And actually, the council has one of the lowest levels of reserves in the country. And of course, that is set against significant budget pressures that all councils are facing, whether that's around temporary and emergency accommodation, children's adult social care, a range of pressures that councils are facing. And that's not just my assessment of our level of reserves. The Local Government Association, when we had our corporate peer challenge a year ago, raised a significant concern around critically low levels of reserves. Our external auditor has raised a significant weakness around the council's level of reserves, and it is something that the government will monitor and will consider. Actually, are the council making prudent arrangements that you would expect them to make in setting a budget? So yeah, I it's not something that I would recommend as the Chief Financial Officer.
I just want to come back on one point. I think the on the substantive point here, I think the issue is not building up our reserves, which is clearly important. It is borrowing money to build up our reserves, which feels like an unusual position to be in, and which is why I'm raising this as a point of discussion in this committee. But I do want to challenge Councillor Taylor on one point, which is the overspend 3 years ago at the end of the financial year, 3 million under following the Green administration, which was something which was agreed with Labour at the time. Can I just point out that this administration, in the current financial year, if it had not been for the use of £4 million of reserves, would at this point be overspending by 8 million. So 3 million, 8 million, you judge.
Well, we're not overspending, and the accounts are clear, and the outturn position will be clear. When there was the previous overspend, there was all sorts of waffle and nonsense from former Green councillors explaining away why they had to overspend, and there was actually lots of other. The outturn position is clear as what is an over and underspend. Yes, we have released some unused reserves, not working balance, but reserves that were deemed to not be necessary. I mean, why on earth wouldn't a council or any organisation release reserves that are no longer needed for certain projects to make sure they're coming in on budget? And those are the sort of things that perhaps they should have thought about or pushed a bit harder when they were in administration. They continually said, oh, Labour agreed to it, Labour agreed to it, you were at the same committees. No, you guys were running the council, you were in the meetings every week with the officers. You guys, if you could have been bothered and worked a bit harder, could have found solutions to stay in on budget and not had the overspend.
Yeah, I think we'll draw that one to a close. Councillor Earthy.
I don't want to join in punching it. Yeah, I can see merits in both sides, but so they both probably hate me. I did a kind of back of a fag packet calculation on the risk reserve. I came up with a figure of about 18 million, so that's what I'd be happy with. But the point was about building up loans. If we're in this position this time next year, will we need to ask for more EFTS and take out more loans, and the same a year after that? And what I'm worried about is although obviously you're very wisely trying to fight the underlying cause may not quite be as nice to you as you want it to be. So it may have a momentum of its own, hence my 18 million calculation. I'm just worried that we're going to be borrowing, and then the 15 million will become 30 million next year and 50 million the year. I'm just worried. I'm not calling in your competence or the officers or whatever. I'm just genuinely worried because I don't fully understand the financial cost of the emergency funding.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies to the committee for any punch or Judy. I'll stop being Judy and Syke can stop being punch. We don't want to get in trouble with Councillor Goddard because I get told off by him enough. To pick up a few of the points, and one point I didn't answer from Councillor Sykes, and again, officers might want to come in here if I'm in a sense, freewheeling or spitballing. But of course, the money that we borrow, of course, which is at a cost, as long as it sits as cash, it will then be part of the treasury management function, right? So we will actually get a yield on it. So cash sat there, I'm not saying it will be at zero cost. There may be a cost if you can't get obviously the same you're borrowing at, but I still think overall you get something back, and it's better to have the cash there. Councillor Earthy's point, I think, is a strong one, which is the recommendation on working balance for years was 9 million, and it sort of stayed at 9 million, even though the overall budget of the council grew and the pressures grew. It's then been revised by John. I think John has said that he recommends closer to 15 million, so pretty close to what you're saying in 18 million. Most organisations that are not councils, if they had a gross budget of £1 billion, would not be operating with cash in the bank working balance of as low as 9 million. As you say, you'd want a fair bit more. In terms of trying to take it again, we have to be very clear in what we've applied for, and what we've set out in our accounts is that we are taking it as a one-off. We have no intention to come back in future years to do so. We believe that we will take actions this year that will see that EATA bill come down. Whether it comes down by the 20 million back to the 8 million within year is not what we've budgeted for. We've got to be clear, what we've actually budgeted for is some mitigation of that. I would like to be getting that down much closer to the 8 million within the next year or two. If we are able to do that, as well as manage to all of our other budget proposals, there will be no need to borrow again, and that is certainly not the intention.
Thank you. Obviously enough, I'm going to move, Councillor Meadows, but I'm moving on to general questions now. We're not just limited to this subject, so any questions you like.
Thank you. Well, I've got 5 planned, but just coming back on that bit, when I was at Audit and Standards not long ago talking about the budget, they were concerned because we were getting to a point where our borrowing costs could be so supersized that the interest we are paying on the borrowing costs then start impacting on service delivery costs. And I'm just wondering at what point we will be there. They intimated that it wouldn't take much to increase that, so that we are paying back more than we will be receiving, and at what point is that acceptable?
So it's a really important question. So I think the first thing to say is a big chunk of this council's overall borrowing is, of course, actually the HRA, and that's investment in new stock and repairs. John or Elizabeth can maybe come in to the overall amounts. And obviously that is a model that works by the borrowing to invest in new stock or remediations is then paid back through the HRA through the receipt of rents, which is the same as what a private sector landlord model would be. The difference is obviously the council, we don't take a profit, and that's why rents can be lower. In terms of our overall indebtedness, it's quite difficult to compare to other authorities, because other authorities have counties and districts, and so it's difficult to compare on a like-for-like basis. But actually, I saw some analysis where if you compare to unitary authorities of a similar size with similar sets of services provided, we're actually below average on our overall indebtedness. Now, that's not me saying, oh God, we've got to leverage ourselves up and get loads more debt, but actually we're just below middle of the pack. And if you look at all councils, we're about middle of the pack. So we're not an authority that is hugely indebted versus other authorities. And of course, the important bit is, all of that debt, most of that debt, is about investing in things. So it's about the big infrastructure investments, whether it's Madeira Terrace, whether it's swimming pools at Withdean, whether it's road improvements, or of course HRA investments. It's about investing in the infrastructure. But you're absolutely right that comes at a cost, and you have to repay. You have to repay both the principal and the interest. Maybe it would be great if you could borrow for free from government, but that's not currently the situation. So you do have to repay it. And we have to consider that in our budget setting. And what we have done in the budget is reviewed the capital programme and actually brought down some of the original programmed capital borrowing, which then means there is less overall service pressure. The substance of your question, is there a point at which it overwhelms the costs? I mean, I think it just exists as a cost of the capital programme that has to be funded versus all other services, and you can flex it. You can deprioritise projects and say, well, we're not going to borrow, and that will reduce your borrowing a little bit, and therefore mean you don't have to make other savings on services, but overall we think we've got the balance about right in investing in the future of the city, but also maintaining services.
Thank you. Mark?
Just before I ask questions, I mean, we've all got multiple questions on multiple topics, and I think I raised this last year. Should we just throw in all our questions as a round robin, or do you want to do segmented by topic?
I'd rather do it where, no, I don't know about segmented by topic because we've got the cabinet members in the room, but I would rather go questions one at a time so that everyone gets a chance and then we'll come back to you.
Sorry, I wasn't thinking of asking all five and then somebody else asks five, but
yeah.
But it's
no, I think you can just ask any subject because Jacob can call for help if he needs to.
Sorry. Okay, well, there's lots, but I'm going to start with, because I know some people are going to be asking some of these other issues and I'll come back at it. But I wanted to just raise on the cut to child pedestrian training. I've done some back of the envelope calculations. Councillor Earthy said back of the envelope, but this is my specialty. So the cost of the training, the loss of the saving is relatively significant, 165,000. But on the other hand, I've been looking at the figures. There have been 50 child pedestrians seriously injured in Brighton Hove in the last 5 years, and around 100 slight injured. The cost overall to the exchequer of that is £16 million. That's £3.2 million, and that's on government figures for how much it costs, the value or the impact to society of the cost of a casualty. Road incidents are leading cause of deaths and injuries. Fortunately, we haven't had any deaths of that age group, but the ROSPA would say that one of the leading causes of casualties to children, young people. And if we can't protect young people, what's the point of us spending any money on what the council is doing? Now, it's quite hard to put a benefit-cost ratio on it, but the best evidence from ROSPA says that if you just did it as a whole and didn't do anything else, which I know Trevor will tell me about all the good things the council are doing, but if you didn't do any of the good capital investment, you'd have probably 5 to 10% of people saved. If you're doing all the good stuff, the safer, better streets, 20 mile an hour zone, school streets the council are doing, then the value of the training is about 10 to 20%. So in other words, about 10% of those child injuries would actually be saved, which actually is more money than the council is saving. So in the end, what you're doing is outsourcing the costs. By making this saving of 160,000, you're outsourcing the cost to the NHS, to the families of those children who are injured, and essentially just effectively taking that money out of your budgets, putting it on all other budgets, and that's not even looking at the emotional cost to people who are injured. Now, I was reading the the Qualities Impact Assessment. It says we're not measured on child pedestrian training. Now, I haven't spoken to my friends at ATE, who I do know, about this, but it seems to be a question of you're cutting something that isn't monitored, whereas bikeability training is monitored. So if you cut that, you get marked down. If you cut child pedestrian training, because it's not something they look at, it doesn't matter. Now, that might be true on a strictly technical sense, but all councils are looked at what they're doing. And one of the concerns, I think, from a national point of view, is that walking is getting a bad deal. And it seems a bit disingenuous for me to say this as cycling is getting more of a better deal than walking, but walking's been seen as a bit of a Cinderella. And I think doing this just reiterates that feeling that walking is seen as a bad, something that you don't really care about. Children injuries are seen as something that's not being cared about. So I'd really argue that there's a legal requirement that only money investment from parking be spent on transport-related schemes. I would plead that you can look at the transport income budget, the parking income budget, which is in I can't remember, it's more like 20 million a year, and see if the money for this can be saved from that. Because once this is cut and the people who are doing that child pedestrian training aren't there anymore, then that investment in staff will be lost, and it'd be really hard to start again. So sorry to start off with a serious thing on people's lives, but it is really serious to those families and those children. There's 150 children in the last 5 years who've been injured on our roads.
Thank you, Philip Chair. Thank you, Mark, for your comment. I concur and understand that fully. and I want to add this is an incredibly difficult decision. It's not something we consider in any way lightly. It has to be put into the context of the financial pressures that we're under, and it's not something we would do so lightly. There are some other contexts to this, and you're absolutely right to highlight the fact we are keeping bikeability training. This is something which we have held on to. This is important, and that was something else we had to weigh off as well in that context. We also are committed and have put a lot of investment into our School Streets programme, and this is something which is highlighted is a high priority to us. So our School Streets programme, we will be working with the schools and I just get some data from nationally. It's my understanding that we're absolutely an outlier. Very, very few, if any, local authorities have this. Now they might have done in the past, but they don't have them anymore. They've got rid of their programmes. We don't, as nationally, local authorities tend not to do this. So we're absolutely an outlier. It's not to dismiss it; it has value, but we're not something where it's consistent with most other authorities not to do this. It is also worth emphasising that we have 14 school crossing patrols through schools crossing patrol support. Now that's quite unusual as well. We've held on to that. And this again is under the pressures, but we've actually having school crossing patrols is important for this city. And again, many local authorities are reducing, if not got rid of many of their school crossing patrols. So we do value the importance of pedestrian safety and for children pedestrian safety. And just want to also add a couple more points. So we'll be communicating with the schools to ensure they have information about safety and shared, disseminated in a format that can be used for forums such as school assemblies and work with through PSHE programmes. So there is some work to do with the schools, and I think we've got some action to take from here to do that. And we are committed for a safer schools, streets programme, but also a better safer streets programme as well. So there is some more work to do. I just want to re-emphasise this is absolutely not taken lightly. I very much hear your point, Mark, and I think it's entirely valid. And under the pressures we're under, we've made some tough decisions. But we feel this can be covered. I mean, Ali, if I've missed anything, you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you've covered that well. I mean, obviously the Safer Schools Streets programme, things like where we put in, or we have put in, haven't we, the 20-mile-an-hour areas, all of that is done with an awful lot of research around the data and the things that are really going to impact on school street safety. I think the one additional point I'd make is how we're targeting our enforcement activity. One of the most dangerous things for school street safety is some of the parking that you see around schools. So we're really working with our enforcement officers to make sure that we're addressing that very proactively and thinking about creative ways to do that where we're preventing that happening, but actually really taking action where that prevention doesn't work. So we are taking school street safety very seriously. And
perhaps pick up on one more point you raised, as that is in our parking income. We've done our best to try and balance and moderate our parking as well, and I think there's a discussion, no doubt, around that. But it's a tough decision, but I think within that we've had to balance these numbers, and perhaps there are levers we can pull to push up more parking charges, but I'm not sure that's the answer either. But I hear your point.
Can I just add, if you can target it into the places where it's most needed, so places with most deprivation have the highest child protection casualty rates. If it was targeted rather than just accept a blanket, doesn't always work. But if you did a program where you had a school street and an investment and training at the same time and actually focused it, it would be less impactful than just cutting it completely.
Thank you.
Through the chairs, I think that's a really valid point. I think we will engage with school leaders in those more deprived and where there is such pressures. It's I'm sure many parents will be keen to ensure that their children know how to safely cross roads and that, and I think that's sort of goes with many families. But I think perhaps there is a case to target a limited resource to those more deprived areas, and we will talk to school leaders and see how we can perhaps work that through. Do you want to add? Yeah.
Just to add, yes, so the highways team who deal with this service are working really closely as one council with our education and skills team to make sure we are talking to the school leaders where it's going to have the biggest impact, and just working with them to make sure we can put in place measures.
Thank you. I've got Councillor De Oliveira and then Councillor Meadows and Councillor Earthy, but I want to ask, having said we were moving to general questions, since we've got Trevor and Ali sitting in the chairs, I'm just wondering if your questions are transport related. Okay, good. Then in that case, in that order, Bruno.
No, thank you, Chair. Good to see the colleague there without his high vis and helmet today. But I would like to ask, really, I think, echoing the colleague there, that's it's a decision that, as you mentioned, staff. However, it's also a hazardous one, because it's not just a matter of transport, it's also a matter of public health. Because if you don't have that bottom prevention of people become fairly aware of how to behave on the road, especially young children, what you could be facing here, it's more payout in claims, really. What could... Can I don't interrupt the conversation? So it's payout claims, really. What, at the end of the day, we out from your savings there, and I don't know if you should really reconsider there, not just for the you mentioned other comparable councils that don't provide the steps we do. Not many councils have the lanes that we have for cycling. Okay, so we do have, as a city, a provision for cyclists that it's very good. So when you're comparing to other, it seems we have one of the best, so you can't really compare. So my point here is not just in regarding to transport per se, that's really important. Also, is the tough decision around public health. There's not just been the tough decision, but could be a hazardous one on the long term. They might not save you the amount of money they think you do if you start having more claims.
Thank you, Councillor Olivier. In some ways, response I gave to Mark highlighted the points we are doing, and we do value the value of walking and walkability around the city is important, and that's why we're committed to safer, better streets and school streets programmes. Both of those things are really important within our highways budgets to ensure that we have a safer environment at the school gate, which is a vulnerable location. And I think I'll take away the point about within our limited resource, can we target that within perhaps more deprived school communities rather than a universal offer. And we will work with schools and see whether they can do some of this training. I hear your point about we've got cycle routes and safe cycle routes in the city. There is something in there, but it's really important that we encourage young people to cycle safely and to encourage them to think cycling is an option. Many families don't have access to a bicycle, may not be something that they can pick up. But with this bikeability, encourages young people, young children to say, to learn how to ride, and it might be something that then becomes an option to them. So we have this infrastructure of, say, cycling in the city, but unless people feel it's for them, and they can cycle and do so knowing that they've got some level of confidence about getting on a bike, then it opens up that possibility. So I think there is a value there, and we're very much an outlier with the funding for this nationally. I think very few local authorities do offer this to their schools, and I think it's a difficult decision, and I think we're bringing it perhaps in line with what else goes on nationally. But it doesn't diminish the fact that you're right. Walking is a healthy option. It's better than encouraging people to drive or and certainly to do so safely. So it is an important thing. Well, I think we need to work with our schools and to think how we best do this.
Thank you. Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too was concerned about reading on that you're withdrawing child pedestrian training services, which gives primary school aged children the tools they need to navigate the traffic, all traffic, including cyclists. And thousands of children over the years go through this training session, over 1,000 every year. But Bikeability doesn't. And so I couldn't understand why you were prioritising cycling over young children learning and giving them the tools they need to navigate our streets, particularly when walking to school. And I do have another question for Trevor after, if that's okay.
Just a comment for you, Chair, and just to say a couple of things, which is I think we've had some strong questions and feedback on this area, which I think we will take away and consider, because I think, as Trevor has said, you've got to consider it in the round of all the other bits, which are the capital investments, the changes in your ability to enforce, which are coming through, which is, the Safer Streets programme at the moment doesn't have any teeth or power to enforce. It relies on volunteers, and in some cases the volunteers end up falling away fairly quickly, including at the school that my kids walk to every day, and I walk with them. We've got Safer Streets, but it's difficult to get people to actually enforce it. Now, if the enforcement be able to come through, that might help. As an administration, we're absolutely not prioritising cyclists over walking. Walking is really important, and as councillors, we've got some great walkers, including Councillor Winder and Councillor Goddard, are always walking, and I walk every day to school, as I've said. I think what Ali has said and Trevor has said is important is there a way to continue education and training on pedestrian crossings within the schools, perhaps with some support, perhaps with some targeted at specific schools? So I think that's what we should take away from this. I think it's good questions and challenge for members.
And just perhaps to add that, we're not sort of prioritising cycling in that way. We're actually making tough decisions, and I think put it in the context of this pressure on the budget. We're actually holding on to what we can. And yes, it does include bikeability, it does include safer, better streets, it does include school streets programme. And as Councillor Taylor rightly identifies, we've applied for moving power fences, which means we can actually make some of our school streets a much better system, because we're no longer reliant necessarily on the volunteer model. We can actually use ANPR to make sure it works more effectively, making our school gates safer across the city.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I come back on question 2 then? Because it's talking about the proposed parking charges going up in the budget with a projected cut to income of over £3 million. But what we don't have in the budget papers are the projected income that will come in from those extra charges. So I'm thinking, well, it must be a lot, as you've put in the papers a cut of 3 million. You made around 30 million last year in fines and parking charges. So I just wondered what the projected income is for this year.
Yeah, I mean, it is income. I mean, that's what it is. I know it's presented as savings, but savings is both income or reductions in expenditure. So the parking is about income. It's about the inflationary increases of 3% in most places, and then some changes in parking zones where people want parking zones, and then
to emphasise Councillor Taylor's point, it is an income, not a cut. It's about 2.5 million, not 3 million. So just clarify that point. So, yeah, that's right. And in many aspects of parking, we've done our best to keep those rises to either inflation, or in some cases put them zero. So frozen some of our fees in relation to the dispensations, carers allowances, and doctors and those sort of things. And also we've frozen for the second year running our
gated car parks as well. And we've brought in quite a lot of a strategic approach, but broadly the average 3% is applied to most residential parking permits across the city, and that's been something we've been really mindful to do. To the inflationary from most of the rises, there are some exceptions to that, but there's a context to why that is happening, and where we can, we've frozen as well, and it has to be put in the context of this past financial year. We froze parking for much of our parking fees across the city.
Can I just come back on that? Because you're now saying that these are not savings to be made, they're not cuts, they're income, and yet all through the paper everything else is a cut. It's confusing for those of us that don't have full access to all the budget papers to understand what's a cut and what's an income. Just make that point.
Okay, just briefly on that, and someone like Councillor Sykes, who's been doing this longer than me, might correct me, but my understanding is the budget papers have always just presented savings, which is both income and reductions, but he's throwing his hands up. Certainly be consistent with the last couple of budgets that I've looked at, that you present as savings anywhere you're increasing your income or reducing your expenditure.
Thank you. Mark.
Just in the spirit of while Trevor's here, sticking on this issue, is that all right?
Sorry?
Just in the spirit of while Trevor's here, talking about this issue rather than getting you up and down again. And you'll be pleased I won't do what we did last year and have I don't know what it was, a 45-minute discussion of parking charges.
Yes, can I remind everyone that we did ask at the beginning for questioners and answerers to be as brief as possible. Thank you.
We'll both. But just, I'm going to roll back briefly a year ago, because Councillor Earthy actually asked a year ago that some nuance be applied to some of the charges. But you haven't done that. You've just done a 3% increase sort of on more or less everything, with 10 pence here or there to get it rounded up. Rather than, so there are things like parking charges for blue badges are going up 3% and other things are going up 3%. And I think what was suggested last time, which I'd agree, is maybe showing, some things could be frozen or reduced, and other things could go up a bit more to pay for those, rather than just this blanket 3% everywhere. I realise that's more work because it involves thinking about different elements, but it would actually be doing that. But what I wanted to raise was there is income being shown, but there's also some cuts on staffing. So there's income on parking charges, but there's also a cut in the administration of the blue badge operation. So how will you be able to deliver the increased income when there are fewer staff to deliver that work?
Through the chair, thank you, Mark. I know we can talk about this for a very long time, and we're not to here. And you're absolutely right. We set out in 23 to say review, because our city parking has evolved, or whatever it is, bolted on over 20 years, and it actually doesn't fit together as well as it possibly could. So we have done this review. We stepped back, and perhaps in an idealistic way, we might have said, well, let's just shake it up and change everything, and do this, and we sort of got a picture of how it can fit together. But actually, when we started to think, well, if we make that simple there and that simple there, and that, then we bring about that change on top, you realise you get some massive discrepancies, and suddenly pushing up one zone, because the crossover between the two neighbouring zones is quite large, and you end up with a simplification, but then triggers quite a big hike in parking fees in one area, and possibly a flatten or lower in the neighbouring one. And you go, well, actually, that transition towards a simpler parking system probably needs a bit of time to work it through. Otherwise, you end up with some very dramatic numbers just to bring about everything up or down into a more simplified framework. So the aim is still there. We'd like to map it into a more simple framework. We don't have these discrepancies between one street and the next where it's twice as much, etc. But the realisation is that the cumulative effects of change could end up triggering those significant rises. So that's partly why we've actually, well, I think we need to hold this together, look at this, start mapping through the parking review changes over a longer timeline, but think about how to sort of navigate this over this financial cycle. And I think the easiest and probably simplest way to navigate that is to bring a 3% across the board, but have in mind how we can start building the more simplified parking within that. So something we've done on visitor permits, etc. Just very briefly, I think there is quite a lot of nuance already in there because, for instance, in light touch zones, we're not putting up the visitor permits because it doesn't really make sense versus the actual cost of visiting. Whereas in the city centre, £7 versus an all-day stay that would be £30 is a bit more flex, and then also expanding the zones where they make sense. I think there is some nuance there, and then also some slightly bigger increases in areas where you get that sort of cliff edge where you're in a city centre zone and then you go one street over and then you're in an outer zone, and the difference is like 5 versus 190. So there is a bit more of the bringing out, which we don't want to do, but kind of makes sense. So I think there is nuance in there.
And to add to that, we're actually bringing about more flexibility. So one of the things we realise, I think there's 1, 2 or 4 hour options on your parking, then it's 11 hours. And they go, well, there's some of those things. We're actually introducing a 6-hour option as well. And that sort of helps as well. But we're also mindful, we didn't want to trigger some big rises. So we looked at the low demand and whether we should push those into medium demand. But in combination, we're ending up with some significant numbers. And we realised that actually this could be a 40 to 60% rise on paid parking in those areas. Was that the right decision? So we go, hold on, let's hold that back and work it through perhaps, but not for now, because that has a dramatic impact on areas perhaps around the hospital. But you've asked some questions about staffing. I was about to ask Ali to come in on that point.
Yes, on the staffing point, a couple of things that are in that more strategic approach to how we run parking is the digitalisation of some of the service. So we've just rolled out digital parking permits across the city, so as people renew their resident permits, they'll be able to do that on a purely digital basis, and some of that has created some efficiencies in the team where we've had long-standing vacancies because we've been doing vacancy management. So that's kind of how we're making those efficiencies, and there is an appendix to the budget paper that goes through. It is a very nuanced approach that we've taken, so we've very much heard the feedback about don't do one flat rate, and things like carers permits, dispensation, school permits, doctor's permits, things like that have been frozen, so there's no increases. Whereas, as Trevor describes in other areas, there might be slightly larger increases where that makes sense, according to the parking strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy, and I apologise, I should have called you in before the last one.
Yeah, so it means I'm going to move out of sync. So I am clearly far too old for this. Really, really am. I feel like I've woken up in a parallel universe sometimes. I learned pedestrian safety at primary school and also from mum and dad to a certain extent. I can remember in primary school, around certain areas of the classroom, we'd had posters up about how the pedestrian crossings worked. You must always look, right, left, right. I remember my dad saying to me over and over again, mum as well, the roads are really dangerous places. Just because you're crossing up a crossing doesn't mean the cars are going to stop. So right, left, right, always. Again, and also at primary school, when we went out for kind of school walks in our little crocodiles. We didn't have high-vis in those days. But, we were trained and we had teachers around us. And again, it was always reminded. So it wasn't particularly active, but there was always information around to impart to us. And there are my daughter was at school with Councillor Taylor, and I remember with my daughter when she was a child, always yelling, so wait for the green man, because all a lot of children try, and I'm sure Councillor Taylor's mum was probably likewise from the same generation as Judith. So what I'm saying is that I can understand why you want to cut the 162,000. I don't know why parents and schools aren't training them anymore. What I would ask you to do is kind of clamp down really hard on the illegal selfish parking that makes because while I can train children to cross safely, I can't make them safely navigate safe places which are blocked by selfish illegal parking. So sorry, that's my rant, but the point is, why can't this be taught in schools like it used to be, and why can't we go back to the Green Cross Code and the man on the old ITV adverts, 30 years ago? Sorry.
Thank you.
Can I come in?
Before I bring in Trevor to answer this, I might just use that jumping off point to just read out, while we've been in this meeting, we've all had a letter with a covering letter, but also containing 2 letters direct from schools on this subject, and all councillors it's been sent to, so you'll see it yourselves later. But one of the final paragraphs in one of the letters from a junior school is, we would ask you to reconsider any changes or withdrawal of this service and reinstate this to your schools as an important ongoing gift to our children, as without it, I fear the children will not be equipped to traverse our roads with confidence and forward thinking of the possible dangers. So, I mean, maybe that's a conversation that you can have with them along the lines that Councillor Earthy is suggesting.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Earthy. I too recall, as a primary school kid, I think the Tufty Club and the Green Cross Mail and all sorts of things, very positive. And you're absolutely right, that was done in the classroom. I do remember that as a primary school kid. But the time has changed. And you also say, what about their parents? Well, yes, many parents do this. But and I think we've got to think, how do we bridge gaps within our limited resource to work through, how do we deliver something to those perhaps kids that haven't been taught that by their parents, for whatever reason, and that to work out where the gaps are, and yes, encourage parents to do that. Certainly welcome and celebrate that when that happens, and within the schools as well, the schools that are able to. But I think that letter, I think we will respond to, and I think within this meeting today, we recognise within our limited resource there may be something we can do target-wise, perhaps in more deprived areas, to make sure we got to use this resource well. Did you want to come in on that point, Ali?
No, just to say that those 2 schools have written in, and we would be definitely talking to them about the information that's available. And as you were pointing out, Councillor Arty, there is other information that goes into schools in different formats. And I know that some schools have access to and use a theatre group, for instance, that goes in and does information on general safety and road safety information. So.
Thank you. Councillor Sykes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I had a question about parking. Just thinking back to last year, there were discussions about as an amendment to the budget, doing a 1% increase, and there was some debate about demand elasticity. So I just wondered whether the 2.5 million figure, especially when it concerns increased income from the raises in parking, which average 3% and sometimes go up to 30%. I wonder if that's a gross position or a net position, net of any changes in demand following the price rises.
So just briefly, in terms of the modelling, that takes into account demand and potential changes in demand. So there's some complex modelling that the parking team are excellent at doing. So it does take into account that modelling.
And yeah, absolutely concur that point. There's a lot of work. I know everybody else has every single possible scenario we work through, so how does this work if we did this, etc. And they're very capable at doing that modelling. And it isn't as simple as put up the parking, you get more income. Actually, if you put it up too high, you get less income because there's fewer people parking in that area. And so it's this fine line. This is where the modelling comes in. But we're also balancing that with the needs of the city as well. So if we push it too high, we might get a bit more income, but you have fewer people parking there. Well, the vibrancy of the city traders would suffer as well. So this is why it's a difficult decision, and where we can, we've done it by essentially an average an inflationary rise, which was reasonable in the context of this. And that modelling and that fine tune is there. And like I say, it wasn't about, well, how can we optimise this in terms of income? It's about optimising it in terms of pushing up the fees and you get more money in. Not at all. It's about what's best for the city, but also how does that balance to say actually putting up by a moderate amount might actually means you get a better balance as well.
Thank you. Councillor Cattell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move on to something completely different, as they say. This is about some of the staffing, the deletion of posts. I was looking at the deletion of vacant posts across city infrastructure, and I was quite sad to see that we're getting rid of some apprentice posts as well. And I'm also, hopefully, because we've got quite a very ambitious programme of repairing our roads and maintaining our roads and so on. And are we happy? Are you happy that we are going to be able to carry on with that same sort of momentum? Thanks.
Thank you, through the Chair. Thank you, Councillor Cattell. I can reassure you about our road maintenance commitments. We've got grant funding from the government. We've got an uplift in our grant funding from central government for that as well. And we bought a cabinet paper last week setting out our highways maintenance plans. And we're ambitious. We're going to fix the roads. And we've got money to do that, and we need a team of people to do that. So the cuts aren't there. But Ali, do you want to set out responses to those details, how it fits together?
Yeah, so it's a really good point that you make about apprentices, and actually we had a presentation yesterday about how we can increase the number of apprenticeships across city operations at our directorate leadership team meeting. So the budget is a resourcing decision, but actually, particularly across city operations, we've got some really hard to recruit to areas, and both recruiting apprentices in and our own staff doing in-work apprenticeships. We've seen the figures across our directorate, across the council actually, but across city operations increase. And city infrastructure is a very important area where apprenticeships are part of our workforce plan. In terms of the staffing, the deletions of some posts within the budget, obviously we've talked about the child pedestrian training. On that, there was a couple of things that I meant to mention, is that we do have a road safety officer that works with the police and goes into schools. And one of the things we'll take away from this is how can we target that person more into some of the areas that might be more impacted. And also this team that roll out, who are protected in the budget, the team that roll out the Safer Schools Streets programme also go into schools to talk to schools about road safety in the area, so that's another resource we can think about. The other posts we're deleting are vacant posts where we've done, and I mentioned the digital transformation of the services, and there was some small savings in regulatory services that have already happened during the course of this year, and we've got a new structure in place in that team.
Thank you. Councillor De Oliveira.
Thank you, Chair. It's okay to ask about the Brighton Hove chemical composting, or?
Can we, I was going to bring that in next, but
okay.
Can we stick to questions for Trevor?
Okay, so we're at the time, but yeah, please.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard is for Trevor.
I too, like Bruno, I wanted to move on to other areas, but just on this, I think we're really suffering from not knowing how that 162k is actually spent. I think you've correctly contextualised many school safety measures. You've talked about safer schools, safer streets. Councillor Taylor's talked about the power of volunteers, and when they fall through the floor, schemes are just closed. But I still don't understand, as a member of Scrutiny, how that 162k is used and how it's divided up across so many schools across the city. So I think we're in danger of talking about something that's highly important, but actually we don't know all of the resource that is actually being spent. And I think both Trevor and Jacob and Ali have tried to contextualise child safety, but what additional power does that 162 actually do on the ground? If it's so divided between so many schools, what does it actually do? So I'd welcome, in the spirit of scrutiny, I'd welcome a little bit more detail, and I'm sure Councillor Earthy would as well, just in terms of some more detail about how this is actually spent.
Well, thank you, Councillor Goddard, and for the Chair, thank you. Broadly, most of that 162 is staff. and the officers involved in that programme go to the schools involved, and they provide that training to the children in the school setting. That's my understanding what that's there, and without by making this change, that will be that those staff will not be there. That's really as simple as that. I mean, if you want more information about what they do on a day-to-day basis, I can look that up and add that. But so that's the context of what those officers do. Andy, do you want to add anything to that in terms of what? Answer that question more.
And I think that summarises it well. It is staff, and it's staff that are going into schools doing the sort of on-the-ground training. So I was just looking for the exact number. It's around 4 FTE, 4 full-time equivalents, but it is more people than that because the hours are very part-time. So I think it's around 10 people who deliver training to, and I'm just looking for the figures, but it's around 1,000 children across the city.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to let Trevor off the hook at this point. So thank you very much, Councillor Newton, for answering all our questions. I think that's it for you for this one. I'm going to bring up the subject that Councillor de Oliveira wanted to mention. I note that we've got an interested party in the gallery as well. And fair to say there's been quite a lot of conversation probably in all the political groups about this, or certainly in the Labour group and the Green group. So can we haven't got Councillor Rokins, sadly, at this meeting. It did come up at the last meeting, but the subject of our collection of food waste and then our not any longer proposing to not subsidise the community composting schemes. So I'm going to ask Councillor Taylor about it and then bringing Councillor de Oliveira next. And Councillor Sykes after that.
Thanks, Chair. And Ali may also want to come in as the Director for the department. And Councillor Rokins sends his apologies, had a pre-booked absence for this session. And we've obviously had some correspondence from groups in the city and people that use community composting and some level of discussion. As Councillor Rokins, I think, tried to set out before, obviously there is an interplay with the overall introduction of food waste collections in the city, which will soon be rolled out to all areas of the city, including the sort of communal areas where it won't be individual boxes at the door, but a larger unit that have already been installed in many areas, but will then be rolled out in March. What I would say is we are looking at this closely in the background, and we are trying to explore solutions. I haven't got one to yet announce to committee, but we are looking at some potential options, and there might be a way to find some funding, whether it's interim or not, and we've obviously had contact from the Food Partnership, including today, as to whether there might be some other options that would be a sort of gradation that might achieve some saving but still be able to protect the service. So that is what we are looking at. We obviously want to thank the Food Partnership and others for all the work they do and recognise this has been, community composting has been something that has been well taken up in many parts of the city, and we've got to get it right, obviously against the context of how do we best use our general fund of the council across all the things that we've already talked about. So I haven't got a definitive answer yet, but we are looking at it very closely, and there may be some options to partially mitigate this or extend it with a reduced overall budget envelope.
Thank you. I should point out to you, because you won't be able to see, that we do have the Director of the Food Partnership in the gallery upstairs, but and we do also have a recommendation on this that we will be voting on at the end of the meeting as well. So thank you for that. Councillor de Oliveira.
Now, yes, thank you, Chair. So as you know, Brighton Hove and Community Compost serves about 1,400 households, up to 150 volunteers. And to me, it costs £35,000, would a worker, a FTA time, if you think about it, for the amount of volunteers. And I feel, and many people feel, that community organization brings savings into the council by the work they do. So they actually support our waste and services for a FTA, roughly, amount of a salary. And it's not just that, you think also about the eroding more and more the community. There's a community projects working in the city, and we are risking of, because of £35,000, again, a FTA losing there. So that is my concern, Councillor Taylor. And you mentioned that we're introducing the new food composting. Yeah, but we should be eased out, if anything, not just cut this out totally at this stage. So I think it's the unwanted consequences here that we need to reflect and think.
Thank you. Important points. And as a general point, I think you're correct that actually often funding for the third sector, and by the way, there are no reductions in the overall strategic investment pot for the third sector in this year, something that I know VCS are sort of broadly welcome. But overall point is that, yes, funding to the third sector can unlock other resource, whether it's funding bids or volunteer time, and we take that absolutely very, very seriously, and many of us as councillors are involved in many of those voluntary projects. And I think your point on the phasing and timing is important. If it's Vic who's in the gallery, it's a point that was made today, and maybe there is a sort of timing issue between the introduction of the food waste service and potentially reduction in this overall level of funding. So I think it's an important point, and one that we're considering.
Thank you. Councillor Sykes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will once again declare an interest. I am on the board of the Brighton Hove Food Partnership, which delivers the community composting scheme. So just so you're very clear on that. We've had the letter from the Brighton Hove Food Partnership. I'm not going to repeat any of that. My point is about whether this really is a saving when you consider the cost of the displaced food waste, which will ultimately go into our new scheme, and the cost of the gate fees, that extra gate fees, that food waste, and the cost of the extra transport of that food waste. So I did some rough sums on this, and an average sort of gate fee for in-vessel composting is £73 a tonne. And from memory of working on sites, the cost of transporting waste of this nature, non-inert waste, is about £3,000 per 20 tonnes. I'm sure, the figures are probably not quite there, but if those figures are anywhere near reality, then this cut may end up costing us money. And so I'm being very hard-nosed about it in that sense. I think we need to look carefully at the possibly unforeseen consequences of this cut, and whether displacing that waste to our new systems will actually end up costing us more money. So, just to complete, the recommendations to the committee is bearing in mind that argument and others made, that the committee recommends to the Budget Council that this cut be removed from the proposals.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's something we can take away and look at really closely. I mean, obviously the main cost of our food waste service is collecting from every single household in the city, which obviously we will collect from all houses without exception, and that's the main cost of the service. But obviously there are disposal costs as well. And as Councillor Taylor said, we are looking in great detail at the information that's come in really helpfully today from the Food Partnership, looking at every option, leaving no stone unturned. So we don't have a solution to talk about right now, but we are looking at everything. But I think the point about disposal costs is a good one to add into the mix.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Sorry, just quickly on this. I too received that letter, I think we all did, making some valid points. I replied that what is the role of community compost scheme when you've got, at last, finally, a citywide food waste. Clearly, I know the difference between food waste and compost, but how does it fit? How does it work together? What is the transition? And my final response in my email to the Brighton Hove Food Partnership were, are they in a position to help us with transition funding themselves? And it seemed to me that might be a very attractive proposition to the council if they themselves were prepared to contribute a sum of money for this transition.
Yes, Mark.
Well, actually, in response to Councillor Goddard, charities, voluntary sectors are obviously speaking from the voluntary sector point of view. We can bring in funding that councils can't do. I mean, there's lots of examples that the Pavilion Trust is the biggest example of that sort of thing. That's what the third sector is all about. So there is already money coming in through match funding, which will be cut. So actually cutting this wouldn't just cut the council's funding, it would actually cut the income that charities and voluntary sector groups like the Food Partnership do. So it sort of negates the whole point of having a voluntary sector. People want to do things they don't want the state or private sector, they want a community voluntary sector to put their time into, and that's what a lot of people are doing through voluntary. Obviously there are people who work in the sector as well, but we're contributing huge amounts of money to the overall economy of the city. So the message this sends out is that income that's generated from other sources is not considered part of the economy of the city as a whole. It's considered, I know the council has its own budget and can't sort of throw that in, but if that money that's brought in by the voluntary sector isn't brought in, then actually things like Councillor Goddard said is actually reduced as well.
Well, a fair point, although I would slightly disagree with the idea that people don't want the state or the private. I mean, from my perspective, I do want the state to collect my rubbish and recycling and food waste. That's what I want the city to do, and that's what the state via the local government is doing. So I think, I'm not quite sure about that. I know there is cynicism about government, but what we want is good functioning services, including waste and recycling. But your overall point is obviously a correct and strong one, which is that, yes, I do totally understand that funding for third sector and some things being operated by the third sector both leave us in additional match funding, but they can also apply for charitable things that the council cannot, and voluntary, and etc. And I think in this city, in many ways, we're very, very lucky at the strength of our VCS and third sector. I would imagine many cities in the country would kill for a VCS sector of the strength and breadth of ours, all of which goes back to the context of this, which is, just to repeat again, we are looking at this and seeing whether there are other mitigations, other possibly transitional funding that, as Councillor Goddard references.
Thank you. So I think apart from mentioning again that we have got a recommendation which we'll take all the recommendations, which we have 3 of for everyone else's info at the end. So we'll move on from this for now, but we'll come back to it on the recommendation. Yeah? Oh,
Sorry, Jasmine, it's the right-hand button on your mic.
Thank you.
I had a question regarding the charging for public toilets. Is that the time for that one?
Is that, are you going to say that? Yeah, because it would be Tim. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So I have a series of questions. First of them was kind of around the cost saving. I would like to know where the £70,000 saving came from, and then what's going to be the cost of getting these charging stations and implementing them, and then how long is it going to take to break even from the 50p charges? Secondly, what is the evidence that people are going to be willing to take part in the community toilet schemes and the Use Our Loo schemes? Because I know that was something that was included. And then how much is that going to cost? Because I know that the council would have to pay people to engage in that scheme. And then finally, how is this flat rate justified for everyone, as it will disproportionately affect people with protected characteristics such as pregnancy, menopause, menstruation, and then any sort of medical reason for people to go to the toilet more often? Thank you.
Thank you. These are really important questions, and Ali may want to come in on some of them. We may have to write with some of the detail on the investment required. A couple of points is, first of all, we think public toilets are really, really important in a city. We've obviously tried to reopen and refurbish quite a lot of them. I think the total is something like 13 that we've refurbished and reopened in the city. It's bizarrely personal to me because my mum ran a charity when I was a kid that built play equipment, but also built public toilets in the Dean's area of the city. And we campaigned on that because there were parks and areas of the Dean's that didn't have a toilet anywhere near them. And that's restrictive to families, to disabled people, to older people, for actually accessing facilities. So we think that public toilets are really, really important, and this administration will be keeping them open. There's a limited proposal that looks at some of the really high volume city centre toilets that, of course, are accessed by residents, but are also accessed by high volumes of visitors and tourists. And so is there a potential to have a small charge to help cover some of the costs on that, which you say, as you say, will incur some potential capital investment to be able to then do the charging? Ali, do you have any detail, or is it worth us following up with sort of a written briefing on that?
So I think we will need to follow up with a written briefing, but I can make a couple of comments. So one, the sort of estimate of the 70,000 income, sort of saving stroke income, is around some analysis of the high footfall areas. And as Councillor Taylor said, this is a very, so as we know, there's a raft of public toilets right across the city and, you know, parks in outlying areas. This is a very focused piece of work on some of the very high footfall, more tourist areas of the city. And we're looking, so that the final decisions haven't been made yet, and some of the questions you ask are exactly the questions that are being asked in looking at the business case for each of these toilets. So the budget papers are a resourcing decision, and then effectively officers go away and look at, well, how do we make that stack up? As part of that, we're looking at what options we've got to make sure it's not a flat fee for everyone. So what options have we got to make sure the toilets are still accessible for people with disabilities, potentially for residents in the city, etc. So some of those options are being looked at in detail, and we don't have all the answers now. So the 70k estimate on income takes into account that there's going to need to be a period of time of implementation of this, but it is very targeted on some, you know, set areas as opposed to the outlying areas.
Just very quickly, I know just a point to make, which is that as a city with high tourist volumes, but particularly day visitor, we're a big day visitor economy. Essentially, we incur huge costs from that. The city gets lots of revenue from that, but largely not the council. We have parking revenue, but largely people that are getting the train down, going to the beach for the day, having some drinks, going back, sometimes leaving quite a lot of rubbish. You know, we have to pay for that as a city. At the moment, we don't have tourist tax levy, and that's to be debated, and it may come. And so this is sort of looking at exploring, is there a way to get a bit of income to support the very high cost of rubbish clean-up, toilet cleaning, beachfront cleaning that comes from a high visitor economy, and getting a little bit of income back from that. But as Ali says, it needs to be explored, the questions you're raising as to whether we can carve out perhaps a residence pass, or obviously having disabled access to those toilets, so that it's really sort of just trying to target the tourist visitor economy.
Thank you. Can I, just so they know that I've seen them, can I just say that I've got Councillor Goddard, then Councillor Meadows, and then Bernadette from the Older People's Council, so just so they know I've seen them. Councillor Goddard.
Right, just supporting here what you said, that the Older People's Council were very active in the campaign to try to get these public toilets open in the first place, for the reasons you've outlined, and because older people in the city are in the city and they want to be able to be active. You want to encourage people to go in the city. Now, if they're going to be charged to go to the toilet, what are you doing? Look at what you're doing. You are actually preventing your own residents from being able to use the centre of the city. Please, think about it again.
Okay, thank you. And that's a really important point, and we will look at it, and in the implementation of it, we've got to factor in residents, older people, disabled people, as to whether there's a way to do that but potentially generate some income. One point I didn't answer in the previous set of questions about sort of community enablement of toilets. I can't remember the exact term, but you use it and I can't remember what it is. We do have some evidence that already there are community groups that are willing, able, or indeed keen to help with the opening and provision of toilets, including the Parkrun guys, and indeed my own mother, who has the keys to the toilet in Rottingdean as part of Park Charity. So there are groups that want to do that and help along with that. And then obviously there's the exploration of whether there are toilets in cafes that can be used and brought into the picture.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying that your ward mate in Rottingdean has the keys to the salt-bean toilets as well. So council officially locks and unlocks the salt-bean toilets on the seafront.
Yeah, we have a lot of
There we are.
volunteers at keys.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Just a couple of points. It's not clear. You may remember, fellow councillors may remember, that the economic development function in the council was put into the cabinet. I am utterly passionate about the economic development of this city. I think we've under-resourced that function for far too long. What I can't tell in these budget papers is how that economic development function is going to flourish. Is it being invested in, or is it being hidden in lots of other functions within the cabinet? I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell from the papers.
I don't know whether there's an officer that wants to come in on the specifics of headcount, but as Councillor Goddard says, yes, the economic development function and also the sort of Visit Brighton function came into the central cabinet office, and there is a restructure that is looking at some of those roles. But to reassure him, and the economic development currently sits within my portfolio, it remains a very important function, and the activities that were set out in the economic plan that Councillor Goddard essentially drove forward in his lead role, but with officers, remain really important, including via the Economic Growth Board that we've established and that we sit on. I actually agree with him that in an ideal world, we would double or triple the resources within economic development. I think European countries somewhat embarrass us and make us look silly in the levels that they invest in their own local economic development. I mean, I've met with managers from some of the Northern European bigger cities that, I mean, it's a totally different space. I think devolution is a really important part of that picture, in that one of the main aims of devolution is to get genuine economic development and economic growth at a regional or sub-regional level, of which obviously we're now part of in terms of Sussex. In an ideal world, you know, local authorities would also have more resources. That's kind of not the position that we're currently in.
Thanks for those answers. We also received papers on some more detail on murals, and there's lots of language in the budget papers, as we talked about already, innovating, digital, entrepreneurial, income generating. I read through some of the detail on the murals. We are falling behind in terms of other cities. They are, the installation of murals are profound anti-graffiti devices. They're also about celebrating community. They're about celebrating our city. They also have the potential to be income generating. It's been 3 years now that I and others have been promised a mural strategy, an ability to actually have murals easily installed across the city. And it's probably been a year now that Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club have wanted to put murals across the city, and there's just no one to talk to in the City Council. It's been some of the most frustrating activities that you could possibly imagine. Short question, is this finally a strategy that we can work with as a City Council?
Thank you, Councillor Goddard, for your question. Yes, it's been a complicated process because it sits in between two areas, environmental services and culture and creative industries, and both of them have gone through some quite complex restructures, so that has really slowed the process down. But I am happy to say that actually there is progress on the mural for Brighton and Hove Albion. One of the issues is the lack of suitable council-owned spaces in the kind of area which an organisation like the Albion would like. And so actually what has been done now is it's been taken to the DEG and to the bid, and they are looking at members who might want to offer a suitable high footfall space in the centre of the city under private ownership, because actually the kind of spaces we can offer are not the kind of spaces which the Albion was looking for. Just to sort of pick up on something Councillor Miller said, so we have made changes to make sure we're really dealing with this in a joined up way, and it's very much part of our graffiti work that we're doing, which you'll also see some of that featured in the budget papers around income from a commercial graffiti service. But the graffiti strategy is completely lined up with our culture and creative industries manager in terms of looking at what that process is for murals, and yeah, I'm pleased to say there has been progress on some specific ones.
I hear the assurances, but forgive my cynicism and frustration. It has been really hard, and it might have fallen between two departments, and it might be this person or that person, or it's somebody else's responsibility. But if we're going to be entrepreneurial, if we're going to be income generating, then these are the simple things that we've got to get right. They're more than just words, they're more than just buzzwords. We've really got to have change. And by the way, it's not one mural that the Albion are willing to sponsor. It was 10, and I've just been to the launch of their 125th anniversary celebrations, launching their 125 years in the city, and this is something that we should get right for them, we should get right for groups of artists across the city, and we should get right for communities. It's just keep it simple. Don't really, please don't put people from pillar to post, from person to person. There should just be one person that is able to facilitate this. I hear you about our own properties, Councillor Miller, and you're absolutely spot on. But there are enough council properties as well that we can liberate for these kind of things as well, I'm sure.
Thank you. Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, and I'll go back to the toilets. and mainly because in the additional paperwork that we received, no, it's that one, because we received two, the sentence around the second page around toilet charging, it says reduced access to public toilets may affect how confident older people feel venturing out and participating in daily activities. And I would agree with that, because looks like we're putting obstacles in every way for those who are pregnant, for older people, the disabled. The one group you haven't considered are the homeless. Would we prefer to have them urinating in the streets, or would we want them to go into the public toilets and use them in the same way we all do? So that's my concern, because you're thinking about using it in the high volume areas, and that's where we have a lot of our homeless, and they will need free access to toilet facilities to either wash up and do their business. And I think that is a very retrograde step.
Yeah, I mean, we would certainly like people to use toilets and not the street. Of course, you know, even in the current situation, the toilets close. I mean, they close in the early evening in many places, and obviously, if you're homeless, you won't be able to have access to any public toilet after that point. But it's a point well made, and of course, the EIAs set out what we have to consider in budget setting. It's right that they do that. I think we do our EIAs probably a bit more fulsomely than other areas in the country, and we do set out the considerations. And as you say, the consideration that we absolutely don't want to get to is putting off older people, or disabled people, or families from accessing certain areas of the city. And so that's what we've got to consider in the overall review, and what are the mitigations where you might be able to get some income from high footfall areas but keep the access available to particularly vulnerable residents. So yeah, absolutely, that is the intention of what this budget proposal is about. Is there a way of getting some income but protecting those facilities and making sure the mitigations are in place so that people are able to access the city centre.
Thank you. Mark, and then Bernadette. Oh, okay, yeah.
All right, okay. It's about the equality impact assessments that you were just bringing up there. And I was looking at page 335 and page 325, particularly the budget proposal E189, the community care budget. And I was looking at what was saying there. There are no identified negative impacts for these groups, as changes focus on prevention of admission into long-term residential and nursing care. Well, surely preventing older people accessing care they may truly be desperate for is a negative impact. I just want
Sorry,
to make that
Bernadette, I'm sorry to say that's the next meeting. Because it's people committee business rather than this committee.
All right.
And we haven't got the right cabinet members in the room.
I'll just quickly respond, and perhaps we can do it in writing if you're not in the next committee. But I think what that proposal is about is not saying you can't have access to the level of care that you're entitled to. What it's about is reablement in terms of ensuring people can stay in their homes if they can with the right support. So it's not about saying you're not allowed to go to a care home facility. It's about saying, is it better in some circumstances to allow people to stay in their homes with the right support? So I think that's why the EIA is framed in that way, but we can take it in the next meeting or write to you.
Thank you. Before I bring in Mark, because Mark has already indicated that he's changing the subject. Okay, because I want to just remind people that this meeting is scheduled to end at 4 o'clock. Now, it's not the end of the world if we end up overrunning a bit, because the next meeting is not scheduled to start until past. So it's fine if we overrun a bit, and then because the people budget scrutiny continues on from this kind of thing. So, sorry? No, not cancelled. So, yeah, in fact, we have several members that are on both committees. So I'm just reminding everyone that we're running out of time for the issues on Place Committee. And I'm also wanting to say that I do want to, I'll take Mark next, but I do want to bring up the subject. I want to call in, I think, Councillor Allen, because we have a recommendation at the end on AI and digital stuff. And it's an interesting question, and I want Councillor Allen to be in the hot seat to answer it, but I'll bring in Mark, because that was a waste question, wasn't it, while Councillor Allen pulls himself together?
Yeah, I'm going to talk more rubbish again. Two separate things. One is on, you've been written about this, but the waste collection charges for voluntary sector bodies. It's a real mishmash of charges. So if you're in a shared office building, then it's your landlord. If it's a small charity in their own business, that building, then it's a different charge. Charities, voluntary sector groups already get 100% rate relief, but they won't be getting 100% waste relief from the council. So all we're asking is essentially that rather than just bringing in a blanket charge, that there's some sort of review of how it's operated, looking at the size of the charity, their ability to pay. Are they getting an income from the council or a grant from somewhere else that they're then going to have to give back to sort their waste out? So rather than just bringing it in, it's a bit more thought through and considered than a simple blanket, everyone's got to stop paying for their waste. While I'm on the subject of waste disposal, and it's a particular opposite, the other one I wanted to raise, which I think I mentioned before, was Christmas tree collections, which, by the way, still haven't been collected at the level. There's the ones that are there. I think the chip is out of action. But the proposal is to bring in a charge for domestic collection, if I get this correct. Charge for domestic collection of Christmas trees. So at the moment you can take them if you can schlep your Christmas tree down to a free site, you can take it, but if you're being charged for. The council already flags up, there are two actual providers. We talked about Rotary last time. The council also on its website flags up, I think it's at a loss, which is the National Bereavement Charity. So those charities, Rotary takes 6,000 a year, Asalos makes 8,000 a year charitable donations from people who collect trees. So first of all, that would imply that unless the council is going to collect a lot more trees than the voluntary sector, than the charity sector does, that implies you'll only make an income of 14,000. But even if you don't, that 6,000 and 8,000 for the other, those charities, that's a valuable income stream to those charities, which the council is already flagging up. So essentially, it's almost setting the council up in competition to those charities. And I'd like to see some way in which it could be balanced, and those charities aren't just effectively told, well, you've got an income stream which is not going to be there anymore.
So on the charging to third sector organisations, we're absolutely looking at not a blanket approach, and there are obviously, as you've outlined, significant differences in terms of size and scale. Some huge that are based in the city, and some tiny and don't have any employees, for instance. So we are absolutely looking at that, and the team are sort of putting together a kind of principles policy paper to talk to our lead member about. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Mark, you'll have to speak through the mics because otherwise people...
Sorry, I thought I had spoken to them. Can Community Works team be involved in that discussion because they represent the Community Buildings Network? So.
Yes. In relation to the Christmas trees, so I really hear what you're saying, and obviously we're looking at some of the issues to do with Christmas trees this year. One of the things we're doing is looking at the potential of including Christmas trees in the garden waste collection, so that might see sort of an uptick in the number of people taking up garden waste. The bring sites will still be there, so there'll still be the options for people to take them to the bring sites. And I will take away, because you raised the point about the other providers in the city and some charities that collect Christmas trees, so I've already fed that information back to the team, and that is all going to be looked at as part of what makes sense. I guess what is outlined in some of the more commercial sides in environmental services, not least our trade waste service. And so what we're seeing is an increasing number of businesses across the city choosing to take the council's trade waste service, which is excellent. There's different things that we can do to sort of make that more and more attractive to businesses. We think that we can make the service, the best service for businesses to want to really take that service rather than other private providers. So it's a complex sort of commercial strategy, of which the Christmas tree collection is a small part. So I'll feed all those comments back into the team.
Thank you. So Councillor Meadows, and then I'm going to invite Councillor Sykes to come in on the AI and digital stuff, even though you didn't put your hand up. So, Councillor Meadows.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a general question, but can I just ask, is the Learning Disability Services and the nurseries in People Committee or this committee? People, okay. So my general question then is, I was reading the extra addendum on additional savings, I hope they are. I think they are. And I was wondering why this was here. We were waiting on the government for more additional funding. I wondered if that had not come through, because this is another £10 million worth of savings on the second paper that came through. And so either, my question is, have you identified another idea for that £10 million, or did we not get a very good settlement from the Labour government? Which is it, please?
So, as I said at the beginning, back in December, we had a budget gap of about 25 million. We set out a partial set of savings, and we acknowledged that we had not closed the gap and that we would have to in a subsequent budget. That's what we have now published in the budget, and the budget gap remains at about 25 million. So the settlement was given, it went up or down in different parts of the settlement, but broadly speaking, we got about roughly what we had assumed. As I've said, in the final settlement, and I believe there is a note about this, or it may only be able to be published in the final papers, because the settlement came after the draft budget papers, quite a long way after. It only came, I think, last week. There has been a little bit of an increase in overall funding. So that will be reflected in the budget papers. But to answer your question, no, the settlement was roughly as we had expected, and our budget gap is roughly as expected. So what has been published, as you say, as additional savings is the additional savings that we flagged in December we would need to come back with, and that's what we published.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Sykes, do you want to ask about the AI and digital things?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chairman. So I'll briefly speak about the AI stuff, and then I'll maybe go baback to all three recommendations. Shall I do that? Or?
Yeah, I think we're at that point now where we've got Councillor Sheeds wants to come in before, but
okay.
And then we'll go to the recommendations, I think.
Okay, well, all right. The AI point is, I mean, this is sort of looking at our council's investment in AI and digital across the board. I know that takes various forms. We've got co-pilot licenses for a certain number of staff. We've got standard AI built into Microsoft. We've got our digital and AI transformation fund, which is a sort of capitalisation funds of about 1750k a year, I think, over the next few years. So we're investing in AI in various different ways, and listening to concern at a national level more widely about AI, and our national government is talking about moving away from US tech AI companies and sort of bringing it back home a bit. So we've got those security concerns, and performance of AI at this point in its development is notoriously spiky. So it's extremely good at some things and really quite bad at other things. There are sort of maybe cost concerns ongoing and environmental concerns about the climate impact. So my question to Councillor Allen is, looking at our investment in AI in the context of the budget, do you think that we have a fit-for-purpose AI investment, or that some of that investment maybe could be more profitably used elsewhere in the council to alleviate our ongoing pressures?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Sykes, for the question. I think this is the avenue by which we equip our staff in which to challenge the pressures they're facing, and that they're being tasked to do more with less year on year. The alternative to equipping our staff with the tools that technology in this day and age gifts us is salami slicing services over and over again, which other councils may choose to do. But we're trying to look at it a different way and try and get ahead of the game. I mean, you mentioned co-pilot licenses. Barnsley Council was the largest user of co-pilot licenses on earth until recently, when they were overtaken by Shell. This isn't us inventing the wheel and doing things for the first time. There are many local authorities up and down the country who are similarly investing in AI and digital in order to give their staff a fighting chance at dealing with some of these pressures. I mean, let's take one of the digital innovation pilots we recently ran was around supporting staff in housing, in adult social care, in getting through some of those demand-led things. And there's so many other areas where we want to explore and go to things where we couldn't procure in time for it to be a pilot, but which actually, with a bit more time and a bit more investment, would have been a really good area to invest in. Predictive analytics around homelessness, for example, is something we really want to get our teeth into. On the security concerns, at Cabinet in December, it must have been, we left the August partnership, and that means that we are now sovereign in our IT system. We're no longer joined at the hip with Surrey and East Sussex. I think that gives us a really good opportunity to take stock and look into what our cybersecurity kind of framework is. It's something I think we need to have more of a deep dive into. And I think this committee could be a really powerful partner in that. But overall, I mean, it's in our council plan that we want to deliver well-run services for our residents. In the over 700 services this council provides, I think trying to do that without investing in AI would be a big mistake. In the next 4 years, over the term of the medium-term financial plan, it will make savings of at least 18.9 million. Trying to find that without this, I think, would be quite impossible. Anything to add?
Yeah, just wanted to add one point, which is on page 21 of the main budget report, that one of the things we've been able to do by setting up our own sovereign IT service is put distinct investment into cybersecurity, which I think was one of the areas we identified as a specific weakness. So that has gone in as a specific line of investment into the budget.
Thank you. Councillor Sheard and then Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, whilst we've got Councillor Allen sat there, I just wanted to quickly ask about the organisational changes that have been put as part of this budget, within a capital investment of 1.12 million this year and a medium term of about 5 million averaging over the next 3 years. I was just wondering, especially within relation to the medium term financial forecast on this front, it's no secret government policy is that this council probably might not exist in about a year and a half's time. Is there not an element of organisational change that we could save a lot of money on this by waiting for the new council to come in and put in these organisational changes with the new council coming in, rather than spending 1.2 million now, 5 million next year, just for us to have to start all over again with the new council?
So you're linking that to local government reorganisation, is that what you're referring to? So it's my understanding that Councillor Sankey has applied to the government to designate us as a continuing authority rather than creating a whole new one if the new areas we've asked to merge to are approved, so Falmer, East Saltine and Peacehaven. So it will still be Brighton Hove City Council. But beyond that, there are many teams that within the budget papers will undergo restructures. Some of that is reflecting how they've been working already. Some of that is reflecting how we want them to change to face new circumstances. So, for example, the comms team have a very broad kind of array of duties and skills. We want to reorientate that so they have more of a depth and really make really deep impact rather than just a broad impact. So there's a lot of things like that that will be coming across my portfolio specifically. I mean, others, if we weren't running over, could have dived in more to that. But anything to add, Councillor Taylor?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the important point is that our preference is that we remain a continuing authority. So actually, the council, either if we stay as we are, which obviously we would then stay as Brighton together, or if we were to change our boundary slightly, would stay as a continuing, which is a key point because it means you don't then have to do your sort of 2P and recontracting. But as you said, separately, there are implied or written in the papers various areas where we do need to look at restructures. If we do expand, clearly we will then need to look at the overall structure of services and the extension of services or the combination of services into other areas. So we just have to look at that as and when it happens. Obviously, there's been a good amount of work and prep in our submission at thinking about those services. And so in a sense, officers are somewhat ready for what will need to happen, but clearly we need to wait for the government decision.
And just one additional point, and we've got Alan Stephen here, who's our Director of People and Innovation, who's Senior Responsible Officer for the organisational change that you've identified those figures, but within that is a range of savings, some of which are from the Digital Innovation Programme, and Councillor Allen's talked about the pilot. So those, we can look at making savings in those areas almost regardless of the outcome of LGR, and in all of our thinking is how would we then translate that into, potentially a new geography. But some of those changes we're making are happening within services now, and those savings are happening as we go along.
Oh, it's just a comment and question on the security side of things. The consultant, I've worked with at least 3 local authorities that couldn't pay, one that couldn't pay me because they'd been hacked and lost everything, and 2 others that had real problems. I won't name them because that would be really unfair, also because it's probably confidential. But those authorities are no different to any other local authorities. One would assume they didn't expect it to happen. So to say, oh, we have everything backed up, they would presumably have said the same thing, and yet they really suffered. So are you doing even more, to back things up and to anticipate a problem rather than just hoping that it won't happen?
Well, yes, we are, but it's not something we can presume. I mean, different authorities have different arrangements. I mean, we were in arrangements with Surrey and East Sussex. Kensington, Hammersmith and Westminster have a kind of joint arrangement I know of. So there are different operations up and down the country that I can't comment on, but here the answer is yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we now are going to move to the recommendations that we're being asked to vote on, and I'm going to invite Ollie to propose them and someone to second them if they want to, and then I'm going to bring in, because this is the budget we're talking about, I'm going to bring in John Hooton for his advice about the recommendations, because that's what will happen at Budget Council if these recommendations turn into amendments or whatever, and then we're going to vote on them. So, Ollie.
All right, I'll be brief, Chair. Thank you very much. I won't talk about the community composting number one. That's straightforward, as stated. The other two are clearly not without controversy. And I suppose what I'm asking committee to do is just, don't just throw up your hands in horror, but just reflect. I mean, I think what point two about EFS use is, do we really want to borrow at 6% to recharge reserves? Is that the right thing to be doing? That's quite simple. And point three, it's more about sort of the business case for different uses of our council's resources. We're investing quite a lot in AI in various different ways. Are there other ways in the council systems from the general fund in which we can invest that money and that would reduce some of the pressures that we're seeing? Could we focus that investment in a different way and to achieve, not to abandon AI, obviously, but to have a fit for purpose AI offer that maybe allows us to invest some of that money in some of those critical areas in which we're seeing real pressures. So it's really to ask this committee to reflect, and then to ask Budget Council to reflect on these points. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to... Did you just cover all of them? No, you didn't. Yeah. You didn't cover the... Yeah, you did. Okay, so I'm going to ask John Hooton to give us an opinion.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I was really just going to come back in and emphasise what I said earlier on, which is that I think in terms of the council's level of reserves, the council has a really very low level of reserves and well below the recommended level, well below a level that I would be comfortable as Chief Finance Officer. And, the application for exceptional financial support covers a range of different things. It enables us to put funding into the areas of pressures that we have, and it enables us to have a level of reserves that I am comfortable as CFO. So really, in terms of recommendations, I would just make that point, which is the recommendation in terms of reducing the amount of EFS we would take is not something I would support as a Chief Finance Officer. In terms of the other two recommendations, I think obviously it was up to the committee how they want to vote on those recommendations, and obviously those recommendations will be advice that will be taken into will be recommendations that will be taken into account as we take the budget to Budget Council next week. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Councillor Goddard briefly, and then I'm going to ask Giles to read out the full text so that anyone who's on the webcast will know what the actual recommendations say.
I'm not going to vote for any of these, and it's in the spirit of scrutiny, in the sense that, one, we had a really good discussion about composting and the letters that we received, and there was an agreement to take that away and have a look at it. Number two, I've just heard from our key financial advisor in the council that this exceptional loan is actually something worthwhile, so I'm not voting for this for number two. And number three, I think quite the opposite. We're playing catch up, and we should be investing in new technologies. We are, Councillor Allen quoted Barnsley and various other local authorities. We are so far behind that we need to invest in pilots, not just co-pilot. We need to invest in pilots in different departments to see how technology can be used. So I'd say it's a wise spend. I take your points. I take the spirit of what you were saying about AI and security and cyber security. Those are all worthwhile things, but I don't think I need to vote yes to these for these to be taken seriously by this administration. I think we've all contributed to that discussion. There's no need for these, I think, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, your opinion is noted and presumably minuted as well, but just just to say, I'm actually going to vote for the composting one for really similar reasons. I think Cabinet have already heard it, and we're pushing an open door in any case. So I take your point that it's probably unnecessary, but nevertheless, anyway, we'll go to the vote in a moment. But Councillors Earthy and Councillor de Oliveira.
I'll be short. I'd rather agree with Councillor Goddard. What value do we actually add by voting on these now? So if that's serious, will there not be amendments? Yeah. I mean, is it binding? Is it binding on the admin if we?
No, it's not. Nothing that we suggest at Scrutiny is binding.
So I'm not having
anyway.
I agree. I just want to know the procedural thing. Is there any point?
Procedurally, they're just recommendations of the Scrutiny Committee that the Cabinet please reconsider these things. Right. It doesn't stop them, even if we vote against them, it doesn't stop them coming as amendments. And if we vote for them, it doesn't. It just means that they go to Cabinet formally. So, we're going to take a vote because they've been proposed.
Okay, as long as it comes forward as an amendment, we're not precluding that. I'm fine.
Yeah. So, okay. So, Giles, do you want to... Oh, sorry, Bruno.
Yes, thank you. I think it's important for us to vote so we have that records. I think in terms of compost, I think it's important for us to vote because we had people here and you mean really something close to them, and you talk about saving money through waste collection and what they do for the community. The second one, again, I get the point of our Chief Financial Officer, but there's a lot of people who are worried about the borrowing, and I support that position. Within AI, I think it's a Wild West really, because are we investing in something that might be above the bus and we commit to something that we don't know? So it's a double-edged sword there. So you're committed to something that's a lot of speculation around that we're not sure what's going to happen. So I think you should consider that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was going to read out all three of the proposed recommendations. I understand that Councillor de Oliveira has seconded these, so we have them proposed and seconded. So the first recommendation is that the Scrutiny Committee recommends to Council that to remove the £35,000 cut to community composting, as this is unlikely to provide a real-world saving once transport and treatment of displaced food waste is taken into account. Could I get a show of hands in favour of accepting this recommendation, please? And against? Okay, so that's carried on a majority vote. Yes. Recommendation 2, reduce the quantum of borrowing under EFS exceptional financial support from 15 million at an assumed 6% over 20 years to only that required to balance the 2026 to 27 budget. So all those in favour and against and abstentions. So that one is not carried. And then thirdly, consider whether the extent of investment in AI under transformation budget, digital and AI, and items such as individual co-pilot licenses is appropriate and safe given multiple concerns, and consider whether a proportion of these for current and transformation funds could be better invested elsewhere. So all those in favour? And against? And abstentions? Thank you. So that is recommendation 1 will be forwarded to full council. Recommendations 2 and 3 won't be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think the meeting is concluded. Are members happy to note the report? Thank you all very much for your input.